Hey guys, I am Tom Holland and I am joined today by a very good friend of mine, Mr. Benedict Cumberbatch. And today we will be talking about his new film, Power of the Dog, which I'm very excited to talk to you about, mate. And firstly, congratulations, pal. The movie is...
Oh, thanks, dude.
It's breathtaking, mate. It's incredible.
Thank you so much. And thank you for agreeing to do this and chatting to me. I can't wait to talk to you about it. I know you saw it quite recently.
It's interesting. The film is so shocking. And it's so gut-wrenching. And the intricacies of your character, I've never seen a character arc quite like it, you know, because I know you so well. I think I come from a very sort of privileged standpoint where when I meet you in the beginning of the film, I'm like, whoa, that's not the Benedict that I know. What on earth is going on here? And I, you know, for the first time in knowing you, I really hated you. I thought you were horrible and so just grotesque and awful. And as the film progresses, what I loved about it was that it has these themes of toxic masculinity and gaslighting, but it explores the problem rather than the problem just being present.
Yeah.
And it kind of, not that his actions are justified in any way, but you understand why he is the way he is.
I think, you know, that takes Jane and it takes Thomas Savage. I think this man is utterly wrapped up in a pretzel of hate and pain, and you discover what the causality is behind that. And, you know, I think this is a hard watch. You know, his behavior, like you say, is repugnant. And I think I've had some reactions from people saying, I can't watch the whole of your film. You're so awful. I don't know why I'm doing an American accent, but the majority of people I've spoken to do have American accents. About it, and they just feel so disgusted and or like you said, sort of, I don't know, their security in watching me as a performer is sort of undermined because I was totally committed to being him in
right.
all his various colors. And I then get the reaction of people that, you know, they go back to it maybe a second time through, or even like you start off in this position of being repelled and then lean in and see him as what he is really, which is a tragic figure. And I think the most important aspect of it, you completely hit the nail on the head when you said, is to actually, you know, look under the hood and examine why this behavior happens, because it is something that's prevalent in our culture. It is something that 100 years on from this story is still sadly very, very prevalent at all levels of society, whether it's strong men on the political field or whether it's just, you know, people we encounter on our day-to-day. Thankfully, not too many in our business, but it does exist. And we're not going to be able to move on from the conversation, at least at the beginning. The most important thing is to support survivors of abuse, to stand with them and ally with them. But once that has been done, we also need to have the conversation about masculinity, about what the causes of it becoming toxic are, in order to be able to be better fathers to our sons, to bring them up as feminists, as people who truly understand the equality, inclusivity, and gentleness and kindness. And this man has suffered a lot in his youth, in an era where his true self, his true sexual identity is not only not understood by the world and criminalized by the world, but also not understood by himself, because he has no other context to understand it with, apart from the one person he loved, who dies when he's 19. That's in the book, it's not in the film, but he witnesses Bronco Henry being trampled to death in a corral accident. So everything about him, everything about his development is arrested. It's stunted. And that's how bad it can get. You know, that, and it's not to lay all the blame on that. But it is a combination of that, his brother, who through that time has maybe understood or known about it, but never ever addressed it, moving away from him after this 25 years, this quarter century celebration, that it's the only legitimate way he can bring Bronco back into his life as this sort of figurehead and a legendary cowboy, which he was really for everybody. And that celebration is of no interest to a brother who's looking to the future. And the only thing my character Phil can do is look to the past in order to try and make sense of who he is. He's denied that in the beginning. Then the person who really denies him, his brother, is this woman who he sees as a threat. He doesn't want to examine her as anything other than the threat he feels, and becomes defensive and aggressive and gaslighting and psychologically torturing towards her because he feels she's stealing something he and his brother have built. And then this son who in the first instance is a point of ridicule to make, the men laugh. And then beyond that, when he becomes real through Rose and George's marriage, he could be the next heir to this land, this fortune, this work that with Bronco, without Bronco, they built over 25 years. So it's like a perfect storm in this character's heart and soul and psyche. And I think he's capable of great cruelty. There are anecdotes in the book, so as a gift, obviously a flashback to fill in his past and his backstory. But everything that you see in the film, for me, comes from all of those ingredients cooking away at boiling point. And so naturally playing him, of course, I understand him and I feel for the guy, despite the horrendous collateral damage he does in destroying a woman's confidence and forcing her to drink to survive and reducing a young man's tears and being pretty hard on everyone and not suffering fools gladly. So yeah, you really hit it on the head. And I think that's one of the key draws. And I don't know what it would have been like in anyone's hands but Jane, because there's a lot of...
She's incredible.
She's extraordinary. And I think, she's not vilified him. She's managed to look at it as somebody that needs understanding rather than just, painting into a corner of being the bad guy.
Yeah, see, that's what I loved about the film, was that I was constantly second guessing my decisions as to whether I liked you or sympathized for you, and I think a really interesting thing, because I've watched a few video essays about the movie since I watched it. And something I don't think anyone has picked up on is whether George's character is aware of his abuse, because more so than any character, he seems to give Phil kind of a free pass. Anytime he behaves incredibly badly, George is almost apologizing to him, especially when he asks him to wash up.
I know.
And I wonder how you feel about the thought of, did he understand the trauma and the abuse that Phil had gone through, or is that something he's oblivious to?
I think I'm so conditioned to my opinion through the sort of very isolated and singular focus I had on Phil. And also the book itself is a very Phil-centric experience. So that solidified in my head that George didn't have a clue, that he's just, he's adult. He's somebody who's codependent and doesn't know any other life outside of being body shamed and teased and having his goat got, as it says in the book, through Phil. And when he experiences empathy and then receives empathy and kindness back from Rose, his whole world just implodes and explodes in a good way. He becomes capable of love and capable of being loved. However, I'm not the actor playing George. I think I've said this publicly, and then Jesse's gone, Benedict could think what he wants, but I knew everything because, and I think Jesse, being the kind of extraordinary excavator of psyche and a brilliant master of naturalism that he is, he's got a fair point. I think it's very easy, though, from the 21st century to sort of project a more nuanced or subtle understanding of things. I'm not saying Jesse's doing that, but I think he would have known about him and Bronco Henry. He wouldn't have known what it was necessarily. He might have known that there was some kind of intimacy there. I think, however underground this was, however repressed homosexuality was in that era, I still think people would have known it or understood it. They just wouldn't have had a means of doing that. Do you know what I mean? There's no place in society, obviously, like we said before, to kind of accept it, for sure. For it to be a criminal act, let alone something that was sort of morally seen as being abhorrent and ungodly and all the rest of the prejudice of that time. And I think, this is a question for Jesse to answer, but I think he has, whether it's conscious or unconscious, he has a sympathy for his brother because of that. And I think that's one of the reasons he does have that saintly stoical suffering of everything that Phil throws at him. But like I said, I think not to say it's the first time. I think Fatso and all the rest of the horrific kind of abusive language he uses just so freely with his brother is a pattern of old. But I think it's really cranked up, obviously, in these moments of this kind of crisis coming to a head in the film and losing it, this woman.
Yeah, it's interesting. It's almost like a form of toxic masculinity in itself, in the sense that, to me as the audience member, I was of the understanding that he had some sort of clue or inkling that this trauma and abuse had gone on, and his lack of empathy or his lack of ability to say, "Are you okay? Do you want to talk about this?"
Yeah,
it's kind of another form of toxic masculinity, in the sense that, us as blokes, sometimes we find it hard to reach out and offer a helping hand because it's deemed as weak, I guess.
It's interesting you use the word abuse. For me, I think it was definitely the abuse is societal. I think it was a very complicit and consensual love affair, really, between women. I think personally, but I mean, tell me why you think it was abusive. What gave you that idea?
I think just the understanding
only because it's like, this is the most interesting thing to me, is talking to people who've seen the film. It's like Jane lets you in as an audience. She's not prescribing,
right? Of course,
you know, a judgment or a way of thinking about it or interpretation. Everyone's reactions are so valid. So it's yeah.
I guess for me, like, maybe the word abuse is the wrong word, but I just assumed that your character was very, very young when all of this happened. The way he kind of talks, in the sense that he is looking up to Bronco Henry, to me seems like a 13-year-old boy looking up to a 19-year-old boy.
I hadn't even thought about it. I know, you're quite right, and you're nearer that age than I can even remember being. But you know, it's true. No, but it's true. I think if you have an older mentor, there's a huge power, and is it an abusive power for that to become sexualized? And you're quite right. I don't know, and I don't think
it's examined. It's up for interpretation.
It is up for interpretation. You're absolutely right. And that's, but I wanted to pick it up because it's the first time I've heard that, and yeah, it's fascinating looking at that perspective, because he would have had a huge power over him for sure. As a child.
It definitely comes across that way. I mean, the way that you are in the sun and you're rubbing the handkerchief, it was almost like you were hypnotized. There was like this kind of, it was incredible. It's an amazing thought. And for me, once I had the aspect of abuse, was when I started to sympathize with Phil. Was when that was for me the catalyst of like, oh, okay, so this person has been through kind of what he's doing.
For me, it's his heartbroken. He's still connected to it. There's a sensuality in remembering the man in that moment, which brings him back to it being a very physical act, as well as profound, soulful love of another human being. And I think, but I think it's just such a, that's really sort of, this is what I love about this film. It's kind of, you know, even
it's amazing
in it, you can really be turned on its head by someone else's reading of it. Amazing.
Something else I loved about the film is that you look online and it says, oh, this film's a Western, this film's a Western. And it's really not. It's a tragedy. It's like an epic tragedy. And I saw an interview that you did and you spoke about it's a Western, but without guns. And I think the fact that you can tell this story without that, and it's an incredible feat. And Jane Campion, I mean, she's done an incredible job of piecing this together. But maybe talk about the sort of themes of this kind of great tragedy set in the, you know, beautiful landscape of Montana.
It's a very interesting time. And George sort of marks the future, not just because he's looking to Rose, but he's interested in his car and he's always tinkering with his car. And it is the beginning of mechanization. It's a sort of transitional era, which again, I think sort of destabilizes Phil. He's very much wedded to the old way of doing things, the manual sort of analog way, for a better term, but the manual, the doing things literally with his hands. Even gloves to him are seen as being a tool to many, and I think it's an era where land, despite its scale, is becoming more manageable. The town is something that becomes a little bit more important, and in a way, you know, Rose's sense of isolation and the kind of the difficulty of being in a place called home that becomes a prison, not just because of how cavernous the actual home is and how empty and unoccupied and cold and unwelcoming, but also the landscape itself and the weather of that landscape is pretty inhospitable to those who don't work the land, who don't work with it, who don't know how to survive it and tame it to a degree. And I think those are two very big themes that collide in that moment in history in Montana. You know, ranch owners were the sort of Bezos and Bransons of that era, and these parents in particular were kind of playing at it. So instead of throwing rockets into space, they go from being rich Brahmins on the East Coast to taking them on and having a go at being ranchers in the West. And it's a very specific examination of that becoming then a real thing and a real way of life for both of their sons. I mean, George is very wedded to his life to an extent, if not the relationship with Bronco and his brother, but they have both worked incredibly hard for 25 years doing what they do, loving what they do, and being sold on it. And they in the book, it's touched on in the film as well that Phil went Ivy League and was a scholarly student, and yet he dresses and talks like folk. He's somebody who's holding on to a level of authenticity which that kind of pioneering West personifies. You've got George, who's moving into the mechanized version of it. You've got Rose, who represents hospitality and the inn, the kind of the leisure, the piano. And you've got a son who represents literature and medicine and education and scholarliness and aesthetic, which is completely the future in Cody's character of Peter. So these characters, this sort of quartet psychodrama, represent, in my opinion, far bigger themes of that shifting era, and that really is the sort of totemic beauty of the novel, and again what Jane, I think, really seizes on in the economy of her script and her edit of the film, is within this propulsive narrative that just continues like a juggernaut towards its sort of shocking conclusion. You've got these really heavyweight themes which are so integrated within the body of the story and the character that it doesn't feel like we're going, hey guys, this is a political commentary on sexism. Sure. Hey guys, this is a little bit light into what it was like to live in Montana in that era. It just is so embedded. It's so about the entire world of the film that I think is one of the things that kind of resonates with people. And it's pace, and like you said, there's no guns, but my God, a door slam or a clink of a spur or the sound of the banjo being played. Those are the gunshots. Those are the
absolutely. And I think that's what's so wonderful about Jane, is the same with Top of the Lake. She's uncompromising in her edit. If something is uncomfortable, she will let you sit with it. Yeah. And as an audience member, there are moments like when she's playing the piano and you're playing the banjo, while you're enjoying the scene because of the drama, you're like willing it to be over.
Because of her pain.
Because of her pain, and it just doesn't end. And it's an incredible, I guess, asset of hers to be so brave to allow these films to have the time and the pace to make the audience feel uncomfortable. Because I haven't seen a film like it. Like, oh, Ben, what are you doing?
Why are you in this toxic mess? Well, I agree. And I think that's one of the draws as an actor, as from Cherry, and your completely extraordinary and uncompromising dive into a man-child being changed from an innocent falling in love to just traverse that character arc all the way to being an addict who eventually gets out of prison. Spoiler alert. But, it is such an uncompromising look at a very modern tragedy of unemployed, listless youth, the draw of the army to give structure, the disparate nature of young lives because of separations around college and jobs and opportunity and house prices, and people seeing that as being a way to see the world and being sold that, and then the devastating experience of combat itself, and then no support afterwards, and the psychological trauma and the PTSD and Joe and Anthony don't look away either. They play stuff in slow-mo, and it's not all just about you getting high in slow-mo. It's like, no, this is the emotion of someone who is at the very, very bottom, and you're wading through it with them, but still part of you is willing that person to be good, to be better, to be whole, to be saved, to be nourished, to be loved, to be cared for.
The idea behind that shot and letting it play out in slow-mo is that rock bottom feels like forever. When you've hit rock bottom, or where you're going through something that's incredibly hard or depressing, it feels like it's never ending. And I think the idea of that shot was to make the audience understand that, like, there might be light at the end of the tunnel, but it's a very, very long way away.
You're fearless in what you did in your craft in that film, and so Anthony and Joe, their uncompromising gaze on it, and so is Jane. And I think what it's like working with the Russos. I know what it's like working with Jane, and I know you would absolutely love. Well, we both know what it's like working with the Russos, but you more intimately. And I think any actor worth their salt would want to have a Jane Campion ride of it, because she not only wants you to go to a place of really uncomfortable truth in something, but she's also really good at facilitating process and the space to feel confident about anything you feel insecure about, which for me, playing this role, I was so far outside of my wheelhouse.
Yeah,
So
it must have been really daunting.
Experience. It really daunting. I mean, thrilling on page and in conversation with her. And then suddenly I was like, oh God, I've actually got to do this. And she was great. She got that. She look, I've got confidence in you. We all do. But if you feel insecure about anything, let us know and we'll help you. I went, right. I just read this list.
Well, here you go.
Banjo playing, cigarette rolling, dude camp, ranching, getting my horse riding, Western style, all of it, everything that manifests his kind of his prowess. And he is, in the book, he is truly a master at all of these things. So I had great help, and I really marinated in that character for a long time, as opposed to what I usually end up doing. I don't know if this resonates with you, but just kind of, it feels like you're building the plane as it's taking off most of the time with us.
Yeah, of course. Yeah. I mean, how often do we make a film when you're first day of shooting and they're like, so we're still working on the third act.
Well,
we're not sure how it's going to end yet.
Yeah.
But tell me about the process, because I mean, for me, obviously someone that knows you very well, the physicality of what you were doing was so authentic, even the way you were making the rope, the way you're riding the horses, rolling your cigarettes, playing the banjo. Tell me about that process of building this character and making it so authentic that you seemingly disappear into the character.
I kind of went from the inside out on this one. I mean, first of all, just let's talk. I mean, as far as source material, the book is an incredible blueprint for character and for physicality, even, and a little bit like Watson describing Sherlock. There's such a detailed kind of understanding visually for me of who this character is, to the point that I kept rereading it, going, "Oh, I don't know if I'm the right guy for this," because it is, I kept on recasting it in my head, and but it's spraddle-legged, arms behind his back, his stance, the way his silhouette was, his type of stride, the way his boots would sound, how he held himself, how straight his back was, how strong and lean and weathered his hands were. Lean, not big old sausage hands. A lot of laboring hands are very thick. His had the kind of, I was like, okay, well, I got those weird hands. So
yeah, it was your walk for me, like those big expanse shots with the mountains, which I'm finding out was actually New Zealand, right?
It was in New Zealand, yeah, amazing.
Right.
Location.
But those shots of you walking, there's that one particular shot where you're walking through cattle and kind of, you're almost like Moses, you're like parting the way. Yeah. Your walk is so different. It's incredible.
It's the saddle saw stride. And, he there's also something that's very him about it. It's not just, oh, this guy's got off the saddle, having been on a horse for 12 hours. It's like, well, it's also Phil Burbank. And so it is that thing of having a wider stride. The chaps helped amazingly. I mean, that's when it becomes the outside in, is the minute you have a costume fitting. And Kirsty was our costume designer, was fantastic. And I really fought for those overalls, the bibs, because that in the book, but everyone was like, they don't look heroic enough. I went, this is authentic. I need to, I really need
it. It looks great.
And she really supported me in that. And then we found that hat through rehearsals. It was just something I literally picked up and put on. And I'm like, oh, that's quite good. We went to the hats they'd actually got, and it wasn't right. And it's just a bit. And also, I'd grown out my beard because I didn't know what they wanted. And we kept that. Although in the book, obviously, with time jumps, he does cut his beard every now and again, like once every 4 or 5 or 6 months, I think it is. But the dirt, the kind of the feeling of sweat and smell and stench and blood and sinew and shit, all of that stuff just had to be real. So I lived that in Montana for a couple of weeks. I went ranching there with an amazing cowboy called Randy and his wife Jen, and they put me up in their homestead, which is on this amazing flatland prairie overlooking what the local tribe call the backbone of the world. And it really is just like this mountain range that just comes out of this flat. It was magical. And then they drove me all around the state of Montana to 2 very different, wonderful ranches where I experienced branding and cattle herding, and at the same time constantly teaching me to rope, to braid, trying to pick up on my errors as a horse rider and an English horse rider at that. So it was and I learned from that. I learned from watching men and women who do it as a living, and just the animal in Phil, just really feeling it and rolling it. And then there was a movement instructor, fantastic guy who worked with us in rehearsals. But there it was more like, okay, what would Phil be like if we tangoed him or waltzed him with his brother, which I did with Jesse, just to feel the body of the man that I've grown up with since we were kids in the same bedroom. That very sort of odd, but of its time, very usual proximity to another man of your blood. And That was Jane's idea, you know, to just try and shift the focus in a very unusual way, not just getting a scene on its feet, but getting a character in a very uncompromising or odd, or not necessarily to do with the story kind of position, seeing how the body responds. And then that first day was terrifying. I was introduced as Phil, Jane said, which is great because it just meant I could be him. You know how apologetic and embarrassed and sort of people pleasing I can be and cringy. And, you know, to be Phil, I just had to really park that to the side and commit to him in all his glory. And she went, okay, but you're going to be working with Phil. Benedict's really nice. You'll meet him at the end of the shoot. That's great. And
that's awesome that she encouraged that.
Completely, and all the other actors were in on it as well, and just, you know, so I was in character around everybody all day, every day. And when I wasn't on set, I was whittling, or I was trying to do cigarette rolling with one hand, or practicing my whistling, not the tune, but the sort of louder whistle to get the dog's attention or Pete's attention, and banjo playing, of course, and that isolation, that separation, which is very strong in the book. And just marrying myself to that landscape and going, this is a man who stands astride these mountains, that he leans into it. It offers him sanctuary and privacy and a reveal in the film, which is very much what I think it is in the book as well. He brings the outside in. He's more uncomfortable inside. It's unnatural to him, and let alone a town situation, you know, but even being inside four walls is not natural for him, hence clinking around in all that dirt. And living in that dirt beforehand was important, like not washing for a bit and doing all that sort of stuff. But
yeah, I can imagine.
Yeah,
that's an interesting thing that I thought, going back to what you said there about him sort of living on the outside in.
Yeah,
is the cinematography. Like, while you're talking about shots of great expanse, sometimes I felt very, very claustrophobic, especially when you're looking at the world through Rose's eyes.
Yeah,
I don't know who that cinematographer is, but she's incredible.
She shot Lady Macbeth. She's just brilliant. And Jane and I think I've worked on one project before, but they had a whole year of establishing a language and an understanding of that script. And yet still, despite some sort of big moments, were really nimble on the day, as we had to be, especially on location because of weather and every other variant, but also just aesthetically going, oh, this huge crane shot that we plan to majestically do this, that, and the other. It's like, oh, let's just put the camera down over here, you know, more intimately. And the ability to do that, to contain that huge landscape and then also narrow things down to make them, like you said, claustrophobic and suffocating, and also just to really examine the interior of these characters' lives and to give that much space to internal thought and dialogue. And just let that sort of real gift of cinema and the camera facilitate performance was just wonderful. And it's the kind of thing, again, you and I are often, you know, giving out a lot of exposition as we're flying around one set or the other to green screens or to each other, if we're lucky, to be able to sit in that place where you're saying one thing and meaning the other, or sitting in that place where you're not saying anything and it's just on you.
Sure.
You know, I don't know what you feel, but for me, that is the real gift of working in front of a camera, especially one as skilled as Ari's and with Jane's guidance. You feel secure, but you also feel examined. You feel you can lose yourself and what you're thinking will be apparent. And that's, it's just a very rich place to be as an actor.
Can you talk to me about working with Cody? Because that's also an incredibly interesting relationship in the film. And again, very conflicting, because you think one thing and you think that you're kind of blossoming as a character, but really you're being manipulated, but you're the master manipulator of the film, which is why that ending is so shocking.
Because the kid gets the upper hand. I mean, this is the thing. It's a weird thing, and as I've been noticing more times I've seen it, like, well, was this written in the you know, how inevitable is this? It seems there's a part of me that goes, well, Peter didn't know his mum was going to give away those hides.
Yeah,
you know, he did cut off the hide of a cow that very obviously had could be what it's called, anthrax. But anthrax. You know, he didn't. It's the marriage of opportunity and preparation, I guess.
Yeah.
Again, why it's a tragedy. It's those all falling into place at the same time. At a moment where Phil's rage is so childish, but sort of destructive and out of control, that if you were Peter, you'd think, oh, right, my mum is probably going to be killed now, you know?
Yeah.
To Phil, Peter is a manifestation of every type of masculinity that he finds terrifying, but also offensive, because I think despite the performative aspect of film, there is a level of that. I really believe that he has become that person. It's been 25 plus years that he's been a hard-assed, you know, branch man. And I don't think it's just dressing up. It's real for him. He lives it. And that effeminacy, that lightness, that lisp, all of that stuff it's just something to be swatted away and turn into something to amuse his men with in a very cruel way. And then when that person comes into his life as a real thing, it's just like he's already in a place of disbelief. But weirdly, it's when he sees Peter do the walk and be cat whistled and then come back the same direction that he goes, there's something he's missed something in Peter. I think Peter's whole character journey, I think he does grow from the boy who cries in that first scene to the man who let's say it, poisons Phil, kills him. It's so weird not being able to talk about this when it's like
I know.
Now it's all done.
Yeah.
But you know, he does. There is a massive marked character progression, but I think also he's somebody we underestimate. Cody speaks very eloquently to this about how our perception, and he had it as a reader, I had it as a reader, is that Peter is ineffectual to an extent. There's something quirky and interesting about him, but you don't realize quite how capable he is. And it really gets you full square in the book, literally on the last few pages. I mean, it's an amazing, it's a staggering reveal in the book. And I think to a degree in our film, although there are more, I thought, very obvious leaders, but again, like not being the majestical screenwriter that Jane is, she's completely proved right. People don't guess when he says, you don't have to do this anymore to his drunk mother, or when he says, oh, it won't be long now, Phil. It'll be soon, that he's talking about killing Phil or stopping him. But my point is, it's our misperception of who that character is that's truly shocking. And actually, he's evolved into being that person all the way through. The skinning of the rabbit, the quick dispatch of the injured rabbit. All these are clues, some of which Phil misses. He, in that moment by the picnic, when he has a picnic, he then, after watching him and being surprised by how deft he is with bringing the rabbit's neck, he sits down and says, well, your dad got that wrong about him being, his dad wanted him to be more kind, more gentle. Mm-hmm. And Phil thinks that's just a ludicrous assessment of this boy, this lily exotic thing, which he's sort of vaguely attracted to or fascinated by, I think, at that point, rather than attracted to. And he thinks, well, that's just a terrible misdiagnosis. And yet he's just seen him kill a rabbit with no compunction, tenderly, but like, yeah, it's a mismatch. It's a real misstep for me. It's the one moment in the film where I'm going, oh, Phil really missed the trick there. Do you know what I mean? He gets, there's something more about Peter being content with who he is and being confident in himself with that walk when he comes back. He doesn't flinch. He doesn't take a route around the back of the tent. He doesn't avoid it. He gets it when he sees the rabbit being dispatched. He gets it when
he's riding the horse and he falls off the horse and they're all taking the piss out of him.
And I think, but also even by then he's kind of fond of the guy. But it's such a weird dynamic, that relationship, all the way through the film, from being a point of ridicule at the beginning to being somebody he recruits away from the mother. He's literally got a rope like this. He's pulling. And my thing about it was, when I was looking at Kirsten, was just imagining ripping the umbilical cord away from her child. It was that kind of grotesque in my mind. It's horrible. Yeah. Literally, like, I'm going to take the one thing you've got left of happiness and security, and I'm going to make him mine. He's going to come to me, not you. So literally at one point I whistle for him like a dog, and he turns from doing some work for his mum, getting some earth for the flowers she's trying to plant, and I take him into the barn to sort of start to I wouldn't say groom, because that's so heavy with connotation. I don't think that's there. I think it really is, he's trying to weaponize that relationship to destroy the mother. And yeah, he's kind of bored. So he wants to see if he can turn a feet guy into, who's got something about him, into a cowboy. But the first time they go off riding together, you should wonder whether he's going to, make him do something that's going to result in an accident, and he's going to come back, Phil, back on his own, and, oh, sorry, Peter didn't make it, And the power switch in that dynamic is just so interesting. Working with Cody was just a dream. And because we were more intimate in that relationship, I was able to be far more on the same page in a way with Cody. It was the 1 or 2 times that I kind of let my guard down as being a character all day, every day, because I felt we both needed to get that dance so right at the end. We weren't talking about what effect we wanted it to have, but we were just encouraging each other as actors rather than just being a character all the time. And we're both terrible gigglers, so we would giggle a lot in rehearsal. We giggle quite a lot in the shoots of it, which probably undermines the gravity of those moments. But we were committed. We were committed when it was happening, obviously. Otherwise, it wouldn't work. But it's a very odd, confusing, and indefinable kind of dance of seduction at the end. And like you said, you shouldn't really know who's leading who. So that was something we practiced. You know, Cody's wonderful. He's really straight up, but he's got something profoundly mystical about him. And we both just sort of went into those parts of ourselves. And with Kirsten, you know, she had to manifest a lot of it. I was off camera torturing her for an awful lot of it. You know, we didn't have any scenes together, apart from when she comes back. Well, the scene in the salon. I can't say it. What am I trying to say? The dining room at the beginning.
The dining room.
Yeah, all of that, and then the dining room in our house, and also obviously when she first gets to the ranch, that sort of cold welcome. I'm not your brother. You know, that complete rejection of any intimacy. And so it begins, but then the rest of it, she really had to dig deep on her own terms, because I wasn't in her presence torturing her, apart from those sort of 3 encounters. And that's, again, a testament to her power as an actress, that she managed to manifest that and create such a kind of landscape of suffering and pain in her physicality and her behavior. It's just an extraordinary journey she goes on.
Wow, yeah, she's incredible in the movie.
Amazing. And Jesse as well. You know, Jesse, you know, that we had a few moments, the scene in the barn when he comes to first suggest that I wash up, and the second one where he says, please, we really need you at dinner, everyone's missing you. And then the ride into town and him not listening to me in the restaurant. Let's call it a restaurant. Hardly that, but anyway. So I'm sat there in an audience watching all these relationships play out, watching my effect on characters as well, and watching how they manifested when I'm not there, whether it's George's tears on the mountaintop going, I'm just so happy not to be alone. It was this heartbreaking line in the film for me when George and Rose have just got married and she surprises him with that picnic and they do that little waltz on that mountaintop. And it's just heartbreaking. He just breaks away, single tear, goes, what's the matter? And she goes, I'm just so happy not to be alone. It's just like, wow, that's all we ever want in life. That's it. That's the secret to love. And I think, you know, it was one of the many joys of watching the film, seeing the film that I'm not in, but that the character is shaped and created. So yeah, that Cody, fantastic, and Kirsten and everyone. I mean, you know what it's like if you play anybody with any kind of authority or not. It's all about the people around you. It's all you can't play a king unless the court is playing right servant to the king, and all the cowhands, including Eddie, who I'd like to honor in this chat because he passed away. The film's dedicated to him, an older Scottish actor who worked with Jane a couple of times, and this was an amazing sort of iconic still presence on set. He brought his life to.
Oh, I'm sorry to hear that, mate.
Yeah, it's a sad loss, and yeah, but everyone, young and old, in front and behind the camera as well. But you know that, it's like you can't really do that without everyone being on side with it and helping you, but also help them realize their job and do their work. So
honestly, mate, I was blown away by the film, and knowing you as well as I do. You don't need me to tell you what an amazing actor you are, but it's an incredible film, and the feat and the intricacies of this character, no one could have done that better. So congratulations, mate.
Oh, dude, thank you.
Thanks for the little masterclass this morning. I appreciate it.
Oh God, well, I don't
taking notes,
especially with the book adaptation aspect of it. But I cannot thank you for taking the time. It means the world as a friend, and someone who's just experiencing what you're experiencing, and to have shared a bit of Spider-Man with you and the phenomenon that that's become, and just to watch you and work with you in other fare as well. It's amazing to think that you're almost just at the beginning. You've accomplished so much already, and
thank you, mate.
To have you get this film and to have you and I talk about it as friends and colleagues, it's a gift. So thank you.
No, my pleasure. Honestly, I really enjoyed it. Congratulations, especially to everyone involved. I mean, it's an amazing feat of work.